The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another deep rut in the road, jostling Greta Szabo against the wooden interior. She clutched her small valise tighter to her chest, her knuckles white with tension. The Oklahoma Territory in 1889 looked nothing like her homeland of Hungary, with its endless stretches of prairie and harsh, unforgiving landscape. But this was to be her home now, and the stranger waiting for her in Enid would be her husband. "Almost there, miss," the driver called back. "Enid's just beyond that ridge." Greta nodded, though no one could see her. Her throat was dry, partly from the dust that seemed to permeate everything in this strange land, but mostly from fear. She had spent the last of her family's savings to come to America after exchanging letters with Preston Keller, a cattle rancher who had advertised for a bride in a newspaper that had somehow made its way to her small village outside Budapest. The letters had been formal but kind. Preston had written about his ranch, his dreams of building something lasting in the newly opened territory. He'd mentioned he was 32, established, and ready for a family. At 23, Greta had few prospects at home after her parents died in the influenza epidemic, leaving her to care for her younger siblings until they too left to find their fortunes. America represented hope, a new beginning even if it came with the daunting prospect of marrying a man she had never met. As the stagecoach crested the ridge, Greta caught her first glimpse of Enid. It was modest, a few streets lined with wooden buildings, some with false fronts attempting grandeur. A dusty main street was dotted with horses tied to hitching posts, a water trough, and people moving with purpose. It wasn't the America of fantastical stories, but it was real, and it was about to become her world. The coach rumbled to a stop outside what appeared to be the town's hotel. "End of the line, folks," the driver announced, climbing down to open the door. Greta was the last to descend, carefully adjusting her best dress, a blue cotton affair with modest lace trim that had seen better days after the long journey. She squinted in the harsh sunlight, trying to discern which of the men milling about might be Preston Keller. A tall man stepped forward. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shaded a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were practical: a cotton shirt, worn denim pants, and dusty boots. He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair, and approached with measured steps. "Miss Szabo?" he asked, his voice deeper than she had imagined from his letters. "Yes," Greta replied, the word coming out thickly accented. "I am Greta Szabo. You are Preston Keller." His blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners as he nodded. "Yes, madam. Welcome to Enid." He reached for her small trunk that the driver had unloaded, not much baggage for such a long journey. "I bring only what is necessary," she said carefully, trying to enunciate each word as she had practiced during the journey. Even so, her Hungarian accent transformed the words, making them sound musical but foreign. Preston nodded approvingly. "Practical. That'll serve you well out here." He gestured toward the hotel. "Thought you might want to rest before heading to the ranch. It's another hour's ride and you've come a long way." Relief flooded through Greta. She had feared he would rush her straight to a preacher and then to his home. This small kindness, the opportunity to wash away the journey's grime and collect herself, meant more than he could know. "Thank you," she said simply, following him toward the hotel's entrance. As they crossed the street, Greta became acutely aware of the stairs. Enid was a small town, and newcomers, especially foreign ones, were noteworthy. She kept her eyes forward, her posture straight as her mother had taught her, but she could hear the whispers. "Another mail-order bride. Where's this one from? Sounds like one of them Europeans." Preston seemed oblivious to the murmurs as he led her into the hotel, a modest two-story building with a small lobby furnished with a few chairs and a reception desk. A woman with graying hair pinned severely atop her head looked up from her ledger. "Mrs. Perkins," Preston greeted her. "This is Miss Szabo, my intended." The slight hesitation before the word wasn't lost on Greta. "She's had a long journey. Could she have a room to freshen up before we head to the ranch?" Mrs. Perkins studied Greta with undisguised curiosity. "Of course, Mr. Keller." "Will you be requiring the room overnight?" Before Preston could answer, a young woman burst through the door behind them, her arms laden with packages. "Preston Keller, I heard your bride had arrived and I simply had to come see for myself." Preston's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Jenkins." "Yes, this is Miss Greta Szabo." "Greta, this is Violet Jenkins, daughter of our local mercantile owner." Violet Jenkins was everything Greta was not confidently American, dressed in a fashionable gown of pale yellow that complemented her dark hair and fair skin. She set her packages down and extended a gloved hand toward Greta. "How do you do?" she asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "My, what a journey you must have had. And from where exactly did you say you hailed?" "Hungary," Greta replied, taking the offered hand briefly. "Near Budapest." Violet's eyebrows rose. "Hungary, how exotic. I don't believe I've ever met anyone from there before." She turned to Preston. "She certainly has an interesting way of speaking, doesn't she?" Greta felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She knew her accent was strong, but hearing it pointed out so directly stung. "We are not so different, I think," Greta said carefully. "Just from different places." Violet laughed lightly. "Oh, listen to that. It's like something from a storybook. We are not so different, how charming." Her tone made it clear she found it anything but charming. Preston cleared his throat. "Miss Jenkins, Miss Szabo has had a long journey. If you'll excuse us." Of course," Violet waved a dismissive hand. "I just wanted to extend an invitation to both of you for dinner at my father's house this evening. A little welcome to Enid for your bride." Her emphasis on the word bride carried a subtle mockery. Preston's jaw tightened. "That's kind of you, but Miss Szabo needs rest. Another time, perhaps." Violet's smile faltered momentarily before she recovered. "Well, the invitation stands. Good day to you both." She collected her packages and swept out the door, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in her wake. Greta stood rigid, her eyes fixed on the floor. First impressions in this new place were everything, and she felt as though she had already been found wanting. Mrs. Perkins broke the uncomfortable silence. "Room 3 is available, Mr. Keller. Up the stairs, first door on the right." Preston thanked her, paid for the room, and led Greta upstairs, carrying her trunk with ease. At the door, he handed her the key. "Take your time," he said. "I'll be downstairs. We can get something to eat before heading to the ranch if you're hungry." Greta nodded, grateful for his consideration but unsure of what to say after Violet's cutting remarks. Preston hesitated as if wanting to add something, then simply tipped his hat and turned to go. Once alone in the sparse but clean room, Greta sank onto the edge of the bed. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was alone in a strange land, about to marry a stranger, already being judged for something as fundamental as the way she spoke. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back fiercely. "No," she whispered to herself in Hungarian. "You did not come this far to crumble at the first unkindness." She opened her trunk and removed a clean dress, her only other good one, a deep green cotton that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. After washing with the cold water provided in a basin, she changed and repinned her long auburn hair, trying to tame the curls that had escaped during the journey. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, Greta practiced English phrases, attempting to soften her accent. "Hello, how are you?" "I am pleased to meet you." The words still came out thick with her native tongue. With a sigh, she gave up and made her way back downstairs, where Preston was waiting in a chair by the window, hat in hands. He stood when he saw her, his expression changing subtly as he took in her appearance. "You look rested," he said, settling on a safe compliment. "Thank you," Greta replied. "I feel better now." They walked to a small cafe across the street, where Preston ordered them both coffee and sandwiches. As they waited for their food, an awkward silence fell between them. Greta searched for something to say that wouldn't emphasize her accent. "Your letters," she finally ventured. "They were very kind. Thank you for writing so often." Preston seemed relieved at the opening. "I enjoyed your letters too. Your English is excellent in writing." "I practice much with writing. Speaking is." She hesitated. More difficult. Their food arrived, delivered by a plump woman whose curious gaze lingered on Greta a moment too long. As she walked away, Greta heard her whisper to another customer, "That's Keller's mail-order bride. Barely speaks English, poor man." Greta's appetite vanished. She picked at her sandwich, keenly aware of the sidelong glances from other patrons. Preston, to his credit, seemed determined to ignore them. "The ranch is about 10 miles out of town," he said, keeping his voice conversational. "It's not what you might be used to in Hungary, but the house is solid. 2 bedrooms, a good kitchen. I built most of it myself." "You build it with your hands. This is impressive," Greta said sincerely, trying to focus on him rather than the whispers around them. A ghost of a smile touched Preston's lips. "Thank you. Been working that land for 7 years now. Started with nothing but a claim stake and determination. In my village, we value hard work," Greta offered. "My father was carpenter. He taught me that anything worth having is worth working for." Preston nodded, studying her with new interest. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "Both my parents, they died 3 years ago, influenza." "I'm sorry," Preston said, and the simple sincerity in his voice touched her. "My own folks passed when I was younger. Father in the war, mother not long after from pneumonia." This shared loss, the understanding of what it meant to forge ahead alone, created a momentary bridge between them, more substantial than their months of letter writing. Their meal was interrupted by the arrival of 3 cowboys who noisily took the table next to theirs. They were young, dusty from the trail, and already half drunk, judging by their loud laughter. One of them, a lanky man with a scraggly beard, noticed Greta and elbowed his companion. "Hey, that must be Keller's mail-order bride everyone's talking about." Preston's shoulders stiffened, but he continued eating as if he hadn't heard. "Heard she's from some foreign country," another said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Hey, Keller. Is it true you had to send all the way to Europe 'cause no American girl would have you?" Greta felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Preston set down his fork deliberately and turned to face the men. "I suggest you mind your manners, Davis," he said, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Miss Szabo is a lady and deserves to be treated as such." The cowboy called Davis laughed. "A lady, is she? Well then, maybe she should speak up and introduce herself proper-like. Go on, miss. Let's hear that fancy foreign talk everyone's mentioning." Greta's throat tightened. She looked at Preston, seeing the conflict in his expression, the desire to defend her warring with the knowledge that causing a scene would only make things worse. "Please," she said quietly to Preston. "It is okay, I will speak." She turned to the cowboys, her back straight and her chin lifted slightly. "I am Greta Szabo from Hungary. I come to America for new beginning. Is pleasure to meet you." The cowboys exchanged glances before erupting into laughter. "Did you hear that? I come to America. Sounds like something out of a circus show." Preston's hand clenched into a fist on the table. Before he could respond, the cafe owner approached, a stern-faced woman with arms folded across her chest. "That's enough out of you boys," she said firmly. "You're disturbing my customers. Either behave yourselves or take your business elsewhere." The cowboys grumbled but quieted down, turning back to their own table. The damage, however, was done. Greta felt as if every eye in the place was on her, judging her, finding her wanting. The remaining food on her plate might as well have been sand. "I think we should go," Preston said quietly. Greta nodded, not trusting herself to speak again. Preston paid for their meal and they left the cafe in silence. Outside, he led her to a wagon parked at the hitching post. "I'm sorry about that," he said as he helped her climb onto the wooden seat. "Davis and his friends are fools. Don't pay them any mind." "It is not your fault," Greta replied, her voice barely audible. "I know my English is not good. I will try to improve." Preston placed her trunk in the back of the wagon and climbed up beside her. For a moment, he didn't speak, just looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a genuine smile that softened his weathered features. "Your voice is home, Greta Szabo," he said simply. Greta blinked, uncertain she had heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" Preston flicked the reins and the horses began to move. "I mean that the way you speak, your accent, your careful words, it's like nothing I've ever heard before. But it's honest and it's real. Out here, that's what matters. Not how fancy you talk, but what you're saying and if you mean it." The simple kindness of his words brought unexpected tears to Greta's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. No one had spoken to her with such straightforward acceptance since she'd left her village. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means much to me." They left Enid behind, the wagon rolling across the open prairie. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, turning the tall grasses golden. After the tension of the town, the open space felt like relief. Greta breathed deeply, taking in the scent of earth and grass, so different from the forests of her homeland but beautiful in its own vast way. As they traveled, Preston pointed out landmarks, a distinctive hill where he'd once tracked a mountain lion, a creek that ran strong even in the driest months, a stand of cottonwood trees that marked the halfway point to his ranch. "When I first came here," he told her, "all this was just being opened for settlement. The land run of 89,000 of people lining up at the border, waiting for the signal to race in and claim their piece of the territory. I staked my claim and built from nothing." "This took great courage," Greta observed. Preston shrugged. "Or foolishness. First year was the hardest. Drought nearly killed my first crops, lost half my initial herd to disease. Winter came early and hit hard." He glanced at her. "But I'm still here." "And now you have cattle ranch," she prompted. His expression lightened. 200 head of prime Herefords, good breeding stock, strong water rights. The house needs some finishing touches, but it's solid. I've been saving to add on, make it a proper home." As he spoke about his ranch, Greta saw a different side of him emerge, proud, passionate about the life he'd built. This was the man whose letters had given her the courage to cross an ocean and a continent. "I wish to see everything," she said, "and learn. I am good worker, Preston. I will help make your ranch succeed." He looked at her with surprise. "Most women coming out here as brides are hoping for an easier life than what they left behind." "I do not fear hard work," Greta replied firmly. "In my village, everyone works, men, women, children when old enough. Only together can we survive." Preston nodded slowly, seeming to reassess her. "Well, there's plenty to do, that's certain. Ranch this size could use another pair of hands." As they crested a low rise, Preston pointed ahead. "There it is, Keller Ranch." Greta leaned forward eagerly. In the distance, she could make out a modest house set against the backdrop of rolling hills. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, with corrals and fenced pastures spreading outward. It wasn't grand, but there was something solid and honest about it that appealed to her immediately. As they drew closer, she could see the house was larger than it had first appeared, a two-story structure built of wood, with a broad porch wrapping around the front. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and lamplight glowed in one of the windows. "Someone is there?" she asked, surprised. "My foreman, Thomas Watkins, and his wife Martha. They live in a cabin behind the barn, but Martha comes in to get supper started when I'm heading back from town. She's been a godsend since my sister returned east." "Your sister was here," Preston nodded, guiding the wagon toward the house. "Rebecca came out after our parents died, kept house for me for 3 years, but this life wasn't for her. She married a shopkeeper from Kansas City and moved there last spring." He hesitated. "That's when I decided to advertise for a wife. A man needs a partner out here." The practical way he stated it might have offended some women, but Greta appreciated his honesty. This was a partnership being formed. Perhaps love would come later, perhaps not, but there was respect in his straightforward approach. As the wagon pulled up to the house, the front door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. She was in her 40s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and a practical apron covering her dress. Behind her stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Martha, Thomas," Preston called as he set the brake and jumped down from the wagon. "This is Miss Greta Szabo." Preston helped Greta down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment, she was acutely aware of his closeness, the scent of leather and open air that clung to him before he stepped back respectfully. Martha Watkins came forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome to Keller Ranch, Miss Szabo. We've been looking forward to meeting you." "Thank you," Greta replied carefully. "I am pleased to meet you also." If Martha noticed her accent, she gave no sign beyond a warm smile. "You must be exhausted after your journey. I've prepared supper and aired out the guest room for you." Thomas Watkins stepped forward to help Preston with Greta's trunk. "The cattle in the north pasture are looking good, boss. That new bull is proving his worth." As the men discussed ranch business, Martha led Greta into the house. The interior was simple but well crafted, with polished wooden floors and sturdy furniture. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a rocking chair and a small sofa positioned before it. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that surprised Greta with their variety, practical manuals on ranching and farming, but also novels, poetry, and history. "Preston's quite the reader," Martha commented, noticing Greta's interest. "Winter evenings get long out here." The kitchen was large and practical, with a cast-iron stove, a wooden table that could seat 6, and open shelves holding dishes and supplies. A pot of something savory bubbled on the stove, filling the house with a homey aroma. "Beef stew," Martha explained, "and fresh bread. Nothing fancy but hearty." "It smells wonderful," Greta said sincerely. "In Hungary, we also make stews, though with different spices, perhaps." Martha's eyes lit with interest. "You'll have to teach me sometime. I'm always looking to learn new dishes." This simple acceptance, the lack of judgment about her accent or her foreignness, made Greta's tight shoulders relax slightly. Martha showed her upstairs to the guest room, a simple but comfortable space with a single bed, a washstand, and a small dresser. "Preston said to tell you that there's no rush about the wedding," Martha said, her tone carefully neutral. "He thought you might want some time to settle in first. The Reverend comes through once a month anyway. He'll be back in 2 weeks." Greta nodded, gratitude washing over her. The prospect of marrying immediately upon arrival had been daunting. This consideration, this gift of time to adjust, spoke well of Preston Keller's character. Please thank him for me, she said. I would like to know my new home before. Of course, dear, Martha patted her hand. I'll leave you to freshen up. Supper in half an hour. Alone in the room that would be hers temporarily, Greta moved to the window and looked out at the vast landscape that was to be her home. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful in a way entirely different from the green hills of Hungary, but beautiful nonetheless. I can belong here, she whispered to herself in Hungarian. I can make this home. At supper, Thomas and Martha carried most of the conversation, telling stories about the ranch and the surrounding area that allowed Greta to listen more than speak. Preston occasionally added details, but seemed content to let his foreman talk. Greta noticed how his eyes frequently returned to her, assessing her reactions, ensuring her comfort. When the meal was finished, Martha and Thomas excused themselves to return to their cabin, leaving Preston and Greta alone for the first time since their arrival. The house tour will have to wait until morning, Preston said, rising to add wood to the fire. But I wanted to show you something tonight if you're not too tired. Curious, Greta nodded. I am not too tired. Preston led her through the kitchen to a back door she hadn't noticed before. Opening it, he revealed a small garden, neatly fenced to keep out wildlife. In the fading light, Greta could make out rows of vegetables and herbs. I started it for my sister, Preston explained. She missed having fresh things. After she left, I kept it up as best I could, but I'm no gardener. Martha helps sometimes, but she has her own to tend at their cabin. I thought perhaps you might want to take it over, make it your own. The gesture touched Greta deeply. He was offering her a piece of earth to shape, to fill with familiar things from her homeland if she wished. It was a thoughtful welcome, an acknowledgement that she would need something of her own in this new life. I would like this very much, she said, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. In my village, I tended our family garden. I know many plants that might grow here. Preston looked pleased. Good. We can order seeds from the catalog, or when we go into town, you can see what's available at the mercantile. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I know this isn't what you're used to, Preston said finally. It's a hard life out here sometimes, lonely. The work never really ends. He turned to face her directly. If you decide it's not what you want, if you'd rather go back, I'll understand. I'll pay your way. The offer surprised her. It was generous and unexpected, speaking to a consideration she hadn't anticipated. But as she looked at him, this tall, serious man who had built something from nothing, who had defended her against mockery, who had called her accented voice home, Greta felt more certain than she had since leaving Hungary. I do not wish to go back, she said firmly. I have come here to build new life, with you if you still wish it. The relief in Preston's eyes was unmistakable. I do wish it, very much. In that moment, standing in the garden as twilight deepened around them, something shifted between them, not yet love, perhaps, but the foundation upon which it might be built. Dawn broke over Keller Ranch with a symphony of colors that took Greta's breath away. She had risen early, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, and now stood on the porch watching as the sun transformed the prairie from shadowed mystery to vibrant life. The sound of boots on the porch boards made her turn. Preston approached, 2 steaming cups in his hands. Coffee. He offered, extending one to her. Thank you. She accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The morning air had a chill that belied the heat that would come later. You're up early, Preston observed, leaning against the porch railing beside her. In Hungary, I always wake with sun, Greta explained. My father said first light is God's gift to those willing to receive it. Preston smiled. Your father and mine would have gotten along. He said something similar. He gestured toward the east. Never gets old, does it? That moment when night becomes day. They watched in companionable silence as the ranch came fully into morning light. In the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling hills, their forms dark against the golden grass. Closer to the house, chickens scratched in their yard and a pair of horses nickered softly from the corral. "I thought I'd show you around today," Preston said after a while. "Give you a proper tour of the place. It's important you know what you're getting into before." He trailed off, seeming suddenly uncertain. "Before we marry," Greta finished for him. The directness in her voice surprised even her. "Yes, I would like this. I wish to see everything." Relief crossed Preston's face at her straightforward approach. "Good, we'll start after breakfast. Martha's coming over to cook, but I thought maybe tomorrow you might want to take over the kitchen. Make it your own." The thought of cooking in her new home filled Greta with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. In Hungary, she had prepared meals for her family from childhood, but American ingredients and preferences might be different. "I would like to cook," she said, "but perhaps you tell me what foods you prefer. I know Hungarian dishes, but American cooking may be different." Preston's expression softened. "Honestly, I'm not particular. After years of my own cooking and trail food, anything homemade is a blessing." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to try your Hungarian dishes sometime, if you can get the ingredients, that is." The simple request, his interest in a piece of her heritage, warmed Greta more than the coffee in her hands. "Yes, I will make for you. Some things may be hard to find, but I can adapt." After a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits prepared by Martha, Preston took Greta on the promised tour. They started with the immediate surroundings of the house: the barn where hay was stored and horses sheltered, the chicken coop where 24 hens provided eggs and occasional meat, the smokehouse where Preston preserved meat for the winter months. "Most of what we eat comes from right here on the ranch," he explained as they walked. "Beef from our cattle, eggs from the chickens, vegetables from the garden when in season. What we can't produce, we buy in town: flour, sugar, coffee, that sort of thing." Next came the corrals where several horses watched them curiously. Preston pointed to a dappled gray mare with intelligent eyes. "That's Willow. I thought she might be right for you once you're ready to ride. She's steady, not too spirited." Greta approached the corral fence cautiously. She had ridden occasionally in Hungary, but was by no means experienced. The mare came forward, extending her nose toward Greta's outstretched hand. "Hello, beautiful one," Greta murmured in Hungarian, then switched to English. "Willow, it is good name for such graceful horse." Preston watched the interaction with approval. "She likes you. That's a good sign." They continued to the far pastures in Preston's wagon, where the main herd grazed under the watchful eyes of Thomas and another ranch hand, a young man named Daniel who tipped his hat shyly when introduced to Greta. "The cattle are the heart of the operation," Preston explained as they surveyed the herd from a small rise. "We're building one of the finest Hereford herds in the territory. It's slow work, good breeding stock is expensive, but in another 5 years, we'll be producing some of the best beef in Oklahoma." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. This was more than livelihood to him. It was legacy, a dream being built one careful decision at a time. "It is impressive," Greta said sincerely. "In Hungary, my family had small farm, few cows, some pigs, chickens, nothing like this." Preston nodded. "Started small myself, just 10 head in a bowl, built from there, saving profits to reinvest instead of spending. It hasn't been easy, but—" He gestured at the healthy animals spread before them. "Worth it, I think." As they returned to the house for the midday meal, Greta found herself increasingly comfortable with Preston. He was straightforward in his explanations. never talking down to her or assuming she wouldn't understand ranch operations because she was a woman. When she asked questions, he answered fully, seeming pleased by her interest. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Each morning, Greta rose with the sun and prepared breakfast, experimenting with American recipes from a worn cookbook Martha had loaned her. Preston would come in from early chores, and they would eat together before separating for their day's work. Greta took over the household duties completely, giving Martha freedom to focus on her own home and garden. She cleaned, cooked, mended Preston's work clothes, and began transforming the garden behind the house. Preston brought her seeds from town, both familiar vegetables like carrots and potatoes, and more exotic ones like paprika peppers that reminded her of home. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch or by the fire, talking about their days. Preston taught her about cattle ranching, explaining the yearly cycle of breeding, calving, and driving stock to market. Greta told him stories of Hungary, the festivals and traditions, the food and music that had shaped her childhood. Their conversations grew easier as Greta's confidence in her English increased. Preston never mocked her accent or corrected her grammar, simply listened and responded to her meaning. When she struggled for a word, he would wait patiently until she found it or offer suggestions without condescension. On the Sunday before the circuit preacher was due to visit, Preston suggested they ride into Enid for church services. "It would be good for you to meet some of the other ranchers' wives," he explained. "And the Reverend should meet you before the wedding, assuming you still want to go ahead with it." The question in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. These 2 weeks had been a trial period of sorts, a chance for both of them to reconsider their arrangement. "I wish to marry you, Preston," Greta said directly, having learned that he valued straightforward speech. "These weeks have shown me that we can build good life together." Relief and something warmer spread across his features. "I feel the same way, Greta. I didn't know what to expect when you stepped off that stagecoach, but you've proven yourself stronger and more capable than I could have hoped. You belong here if you want to stay." "I want to stay," she confirmed, and the smile he gave her made her heart quicken in a way it hadn't before. The trip to Enid the next day brought back memories of Greta's arrival, the stairs, the whispers, the sense of being forever marked as outsider. But this time, she had Preston beside her, his steady presence a shield against the town's curiosity. The small church was packed when they arrived, with families from town and surrounding ranches filling the wooden pews. As Preston led Greta to a seat, she felt the weight of many eyes upon her. "That's her Keller's Hungarian bride. Heard she barely speaks English. Marrying tomorrow, they say." Preston's hand on the small of her back guided her forward, his touch reassuring. They found seats near the middle of the church, and Greta kept her eyes focused ahead, her back straight and her expression composed despite the fluttering in her stomach. As the service progressed, Greta found herself relaxing slightly. The familiar rhythms of worship, the prayers and hymns, though in a different language, gave her comfort. She followed along as best she could, her lips forming the English words carefully. After the service, the Reverend, a kindly man named Reverend Simmons, made his way to them through the departing congregation. "Mr. Keller, good to see you in town," he greeted Preston before turning to Greta with a warm smile. "And this must be Miss Szabo. I've heard much about you, my dear." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Reverend," Greta replied, trying to enunciate clearly. "The pleasure is mine," he assured her. "I understand you've come quite a distance to make Oklahoma your home." "Yes, from Hungary. It is very different here, but beautiful in its own way." "Indeed it is," the Reverend agreed. "God's handiwork comes in many forms." He turned to Preston. I'll be out to the ranch tomorrow afternoon as arranged, around 2 o'clock if that suits. Preston nodded. We'll be ready. As they made their way outside, Greta noticed Violet Jenkins standing with a group of young women, all watching their progress with undisguised interest. Violet detached herself from the group and approached them, her yellow Sunday dress rustling with each deliberate step. "Preston, Miss Szabo." "How lovely to see you both," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the churchyard. "I was just telling the ladies about your impending nuptials. Such exciting news." Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Jenkins," he acknowledged with a nod. "Yes, Reverend Simmons will be performing the ceremony tomorrow." Violet's smile didn't reach her eyes. "So soon? Why, Miss Szabo has barely had time to learn our American ways. I do hope you're adjusting well, dear." She turned to Greta with exaggerated concern. "Ranch life can be so isolating, especially for someone used to more civilization." "I am adjusting very well, thank you," Greta replied steadily. "Preston's ranch is beautiful and the work satisfies me." "Work?" Violet's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "How quaint." "I suppose in your country, women are accustomed to manual labor. Here in America, a lady's hands are meant to remain soft." She extended her own gloved hand as if to demonstrate. Before Greta could respond, a stout woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair joined them. "Violet Jenkins, don't you have choir practice to attend?" she said firmly before turning to Greta with a genuine smile. "You must be Miss Szabo. I'm Eleanor Watson, wife of Dr. Watson. We live just outside town." She extended her hand to Greta. "I'm delighted to finally meet you. Martha Watkins has told me wonderful things about you." Violet, effectively dismissed, retreated with poorly disguised annoyance. Eleanor watched her go with a slight shake of her head before returning her attention to Greta. "Don't mind her," she said in a lowered voice. Violet had her sights set on Preston for years. His choosing a bride from elsewhere wounded her pride. Preston looked uncomfortable at this frank assessment, but didn't contradict it. "I hope you'll join us for the Ladies' Aid Society meeting next month," Eleanor continued. "We gather to sew for the needy and support missionary work. It would be lovely to have you, and I know several of the ranchers' wives are eager to make your acquaintance." The simple invitation, an extension of community, meant more to Greta than Eleanor could possibly know. "I would like that very much, thank you." As they headed back to the ranch, Preston was quieter than usual, his brow furrowed in thought. "Is something wrong?" Greta finally asked as the wagon rolled across the prairie. Preston sighed. "I should have warned you about Violet. She can be difficult." "You were sweet on her once," Greta asked, the American expression feeling strange on her tongue. Preston's surprised laugh eased the tension. "No, nothing like that. Her father's the richest man in town, and she's been raised to believe that entitles her to whatever or whoever she wants. I never encouraged her interest." "I understand," Greta said, and she did. In her village, there had been girls like Violet, those who believed their beauty or family position gave them special claim to the best matches. Preston glanced at her, his expression softening. "You handled yourself well today. With Violet, with everyone. I'm proud to be marrying you, Greta Szabo." The simple declaration warmed her from within. "And I am proud to be marrying you, Preston Keller." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect October afternoon in Oklahoma Territory. Martha had helped Greta prepare the house, filling vases with late wildflowers and preparing a simple feast to follow the ceremony. Thomas had spread the word to neighboring ranchers, and several had indicated they would come to witness the union and welcome Greta to their community. In her room, Greta dressed with care in her best gown, the green one she had worn upon arrival. now freshly pressed and adorned with a lace collar that Alina Watson had kindly given her as a wedding gift. Martha helped arrange her hair, pinning the thick auburn waves atop her head and securing them with combs. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, stepping back to survey her work. "Preston won't know what hit him." Greta smiled nervously. "In Hungary, bride wears wreath of flowers. And there is much music, dancing." She touched the simple gold band that Preston had presented to her the night before his mother's ring, he had explained, saved for this purpose. "Well, we can't manage a Hungarian wedding feast," Martha acknowledged, "but I've convinced Thomas to bring his fiddle. There'll be music at least." A knock at the bedroom door announced Alina Watson's arrival. "May I come in? I've brought something for you." Alina entered carrying a small bouquet of late roses and prairie flowers tied with a white ribbon. "Every bride should have flowers to carry," she said, presenting them to Greta. "And I've brought this as well." From her basket she withdrew a delicate veil of fine lace. "It was my mother's and then mine. I thought you might like to wear it today." Touched beyond words, Greta accepted the gifts. "I do not know how to thank you for such kindness." "No thanks needed," Alina assured her, helping to attach the veil to Greta's carefully arranged hair. "That's what neighbors do out here. We look after each other. You're one of us now." The simple statement brought unexpected tears to Greta's eyes. One of us. After weeks of feeling like an outsider, the acceptance meant everything. By 2 o'clock, the main room of the ranch house was filled with guests: Thomas and Martha, Alina and Dr. Watson, half a dozen neighboring ranchers with their wives, even Daniel the ranch hand in his Sunday best, his hat clutched nervously in his hands. Reverend Simmons stood before the fireplace, Bible in hand, speaking quietly with Preston. Preston had dressed in a clean black suit that transformed him from rancher to gentleman, though the weathered tan of his face and hands still spoke of his outdoor life. When Greta appeared at the top of the stairs, his conversation with the Reverend faltered mid-sentence, his eyes fixing on her with undisguised appreciation. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Greta and Preston stood before the Reverend, hands joined, as they exchanged simple vows. Greta's accent was pronounced as she carefully repeated the English words, promising to love, honor, and cherish Preston for all her days. When she faltered over a particularly difficult phrase, Preston squeezed her hand gently, his eyes conveying understanding and encouragement. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Simmons concluded, "I now pronounce you man and wife. Mr. Keller, you may kiss your bride." Preston leaned forward, his kiss gentle and brief, mindful of their audience. But in that simple touch, Greta felt a promise of deeper connection to come. The celebration that followed was unlike any wedding feast Greta had known in Hungary, but joyful nonetheless. Martha's food was plentiful. Thomas's fiddle filled the house with lively tunes, and the neighbors proved genuinely welcoming, each taking time to speak with Greta despite her sometimes halting responses. As the afternoon faded into evening, Greta found herself sitting on the porch with Alina, watching as Preston discussed cattle prices with two neighboring ranchers. "He's a good man," Alina observed, following Greta's gaze. "Honest, hardworking, the kind who builds something to last." "Yes," Greta agreed softly. "I am fortunate," Alina smiled. "He's the fortunate one, dear. Do you know how many women would have turned tail and run after that reception in town? But you stayed, held your head high. That takes courage." "Not courage," Greta demurred. "Just determination. In Hungary we have saying, 'The tree that bends with the wind stands longest.'" "Wise words," Alina nodded. "And speaking of wisdom," she leaned closer, lowering her voice, "has Martha spoken to you about tonight?" Greta felt her cheeks warm. No, but I understand what happens between husband and wife. Eleanor patted her hand. Of course you do. I just wanted to say Preston may seem reserved, but there's depth to him. Give him time to show it. The guests departed as evening settled over the ranch, leaving Greta and Preston alone as husband and wife for the first time. An awkward silence fell between them as the door closed behind the last visitor. That went well, Preston said finally, loosening his tie. The neighbors seem to have taken to you. They are kind people, Greta agreed, beginning to gather plates from the table. The familiar task gave her hands something to do, a distraction from the sudden awareness of what the night would bring. Preston crossed to her, gently taking the dishes from her hands. Leave those. Martha said she'd come by in the morning to help clean up. He hesitated, then added, unless you'd prefer to keep busy, I understand if you're nervous. The directness of his acknowledgement broke the tension, and Greta found herself smiling. In Hungary, bride and groom would be surrounded by family teasing and making jokes until late night. This quiet is strange to me. Preston returned her smile. We do things differently here, I guess. But if you'd rather wait, talk a while, no, Greta said with newfound certainty. I am your wife now, Preston Keller. I do not wish to wait. Something shifted in his expression, relief, desire, and a tenderness that caught at her heart. He extended his hand to her. Then come with me, Mrs. Keller. The name, her new name, sounded right on his lips. Greta placed her hand in his and followed him upstairs to what would now be their shared bedroom. Winter settled over Keller Ranch with a fury that surprised even Preston. Snow blanketed the prairie, transforming the golden landscape to pristine white, while temperatures plummeted to levels that tested both humans and livestock. For Greta, the cold was reminiscent of Hungarian winters, but the isolation was new. With roads often impassable, visits to town became rare events rather than weekly occurrences. Yet in this isolation, Greta and Preston found something precious: time to truly know one another. Long evenings by the fire provided opportunities for conversation that deepened their understanding of each other's past, present hopes, and future dreams. Tell me about your childhood, Preston would ask, and Greta would share stories of village life in Hungary, the harvest festivals, the folk dances, the traditions passed through generations. In return, he spoke of growing up in Illinois, his father's service in the Civil War, and the restlessness that had driven him west after his parents' deaths. Their physical relationship evolved alongside these emotional connections. Initial awkwardness gave way to mutual discovery, then to a passion that surprised them both. Greta learned that Preston's reserved public manner concealed a depth of feeling he expressed fully only in private. For his part, Preston discovered that his quiet Hungarian bride possessed a spirit both passionate and playful. Once her initial shyness faded, by Christmas, Greta felt truly at home in the ranch house. She had arranged their living spaces to reflect both his practical American sensibilities and touches of her Hungarian heritage. Embroidered cushions on the sofa, a carved wooden box from home displayed prominently on the mantel, traditional recipes adapted to local ingredients appearing regularly at their table. I have something for you, Preston said on Christmas morning, handing her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Greta found a leather-bound journal and a fine fountain pen. For your recipes, Preston explained, and for teaching our children about Hungary someday. The thoughtful gift and the casual mention of their future family brought tears to Greta's eyes. Thank you. It is perfect. She hesitated, then retrieved her own gift from beneath their small pine tree. This is not much, but... Preston unwrapped the package to find a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. You made this. When did you have time? "While you check cattle in evenings," Greta explained. "Martha taught me American knitting style. It is different from Hungarian way, but good." Preston wrapped the scarf around his neck immediately, the color highlighting his blue eyes. "It's the finest gift I've received in years." As winter slowly released its grip on the prairie, Greta found herself becoming an integral part of ranch operations. Her garden plans expanded to include not just vegetables but herbs and flowers. She took over the chicken operation completely, instituting new feeding practices that increased egg production. Her meticulous record-keeping of household expenses impressed Preston, who began consulting her on larger ranch purchases as well. Spring brought calving season, and with it, Greta's first real introduction to the heart of cattle ranching. Despite Preston's initial concerns that she would find the work too difficult or unpleasant, she threw herself into helping deliver calves, bottle feeding orphans, and even assisting Thomas with medical treatments for the herd. "You're a natural," Thomas commented one evening after Greta had successfully helped deliver a breech calf that even he had been concerned about. "Most town women would faint at half of what you've done today." "In Hungary, farm women help with all animals," Greta explained, washing blood from her hands in a basin. "Life and death are part of farm. We do not hide from it." Preston, who had been checking other pregnant cows, returned to find Greta still in the barn, a newborn calf nursing from its mother under her watchful eye. The pride in his expression when Thomas recounted her actions warmed her more than any verbal praise could have. "You continue to surprise me, Mrs. Keller," Preston said as they walked back to the house together, his arm around her waist. "I thought I was getting a wife. Turns out I got a partner in every sense." By the time summer arrived, bringing its intense heat and periodic violent storms, Greta had been at Keller Ranch for nearly 9 months. Her English had improved significantly, though her accent remained pronounced, a fact that no longer bothered her as it once had. In July, Preston announced they would attend the Independence Day celebration in Enid. "There's a dance in the evening," he explained. "Thought you might enjoy it." The prospect of returning to town, of facing the stares and whispers again, brought back memories of her arrival. But Greta was not the same uncertain immigrant who had stepped off the stagecoach. She was Mrs. Keller now, mistress of a prosperous ranch, with friends like Alina Watson, and the respect of neighboring ranchers' wives earned through her competence and kindness. Enid had changed as well in the months since Greta's arrival. The railroad had finally reached the town, bringing increased commerce and new settlers. Main Street sported several new buildings, and the hotel where Greta had first stayed now boasted a fresh coat of paint and expanded dining facilities. The Independence Day festivities were in full swing when they arrived, children running with streamers, a brass band playing patriotic tunes, food vendors selling pies and barbecued meats. Preston seemed different in town, more alert, his arm protective around Greta as they navigated the crowded streets. They were examining goods at a peddler's stall when a familiar voice called out behind them. "Well, if it isn't the Kellers, what a delightful surprise." Violet Jenkins approached, resplendent in a fashionable blue dress that must have come directly from Kansas City or even Chicago. On her arm was a well-dressed man Greta didn't recognize, with a gold watch chain visible across his vest and an expression of mild discomfort. "Miss Jenkins," Preston nodded politely. "Or is it Mrs. now?" he gestured to her companion. "Not yet," Violet laughed, "but soon. May I present Mr. Howard Blackwell, recently arrived from St. Louis to manage the new bank. Howard, this is Preston Keller and his wife." The slight hesitation before the word wife was subtle but unmistakable. Mr. Blackwell extended his hand to Preston, then to Greta. Pleased to meet you both. I've heard the Keller Ranch produces some of the finest cattle in the territory. We try, Preston acknowledged modestly, and Mrs. Keller, Blackwell continued, Violet mentioned you're from Europe originally. Hungary, was it? Yes, Greta confirmed. I came to America last year. Fascinating, Blackwell said and seemed to mean it. My grandmother was from Prague, not the same as Hungary, I know, but in the general vicinity. I've always been interested in that part of the world. Violet looked annoyed at her fiancé's genuine interest. Yes, well, we really must circulate. The mayor is expecting us for the luncheon. She tugged at Blackwell's arm. Lovely to see you both. Do enjoy the celebrations. As they walked away, Preston squeezed Greta's hand. You handled that well. Violet still has her claws out, but you didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing it bother you. She does not bother me anymore, Greta said truthfully. Her opinion is not important to me now. The day progressed pleasantly, with Greta finding herself welcomed into conversations with women who had previously viewed her with suspicion. Her improving English helped, but so did the visible partnership between her and Preston. The town had seen them working together, building something substantial, and that earned respect in a community where survival depended on such partnerships. At the evening dance, held in the newly constructed town hall, Greta wore her best dress, a new one Preston had ordered for her birthday from a Kansas City catalog. The deep burgundy color complemented her auburn hair, which she wore partly up, partly flowing down her back as Preston preferred it. May I have this dance, Mrs. Keller? Preston asked formally as the band struck up a waltz. I would be honored, Mr. Keller, she replied with a smile. As he guided her across the floor, Greta was acutely aware of eyes upon them, not judgmental now, but approving. They made a handsome couple, the tall rancher and his European bride, moving together with the ease of people completely comfortable with one another. Remember when we first met? Preston asked as they waltzed. How nervous you looked stepping down from that stagecoach, Greta nodded. I was terrified. Everything was strange and I knew no one would understand my speech. I understood you just fine, Preston said softly. Your accent was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. You never said this then, Greta pointed out. Preston's smile was rueful. I wasn't good with words then. Still not, I suppose. But I meant what I said that first day in the wagon. Your voice is home to me, Greta. The way you speak, it's the sound I want to hear at the beginning and end of every day. The simple declaration, made in the midst of a crowded dance floor, meant more than any elaborate profession of love could have. Greta leaned her head against his chest briefly, overcome. And you are my home now, she said when she could trust her voice. Not Hungary, not even America. You, Preston Keller. As summer faded into fall and the ranch prepared for another winter, Greta realized with certainty what she had suspected for several weeks. She was with child. Their first year of marriage had been so busy, so focused on establishing their partnership and building the ranch, that starting a family had been a distant prospect rather than an immediate goal. She told Preston on a crisp October evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset exactly 1 year after their wedding day. I have an anniversary gift for you, she said, taking his hand, but it will not arrive for some months yet. It took him a moment to understand her meaning, but when he did, his face transformed with wonder. A baby, you're sure? Greta nodded, her free hand resting on her still flat stomach. The child will come in late spring, I think. May, perhaps. Preston pulled her into his arms, his embrace gentle as if she had suddenly become fragile. A baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Our child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Despite Eleanor's and Martha's insistence that she rest more, Greta continued most of her usual activities. adapting only when her growing belly made certain tasks impractical. Preston watched her like a hawk, ready to intervene at any sign of strain, but he knew better than to suggest she withdraw completely from ranch operations. In early May, as the prairie erupted with wildflowers and new calves wobbled in the pastures, Greta went into labor. The process was long and difficult, lasting through a day and night before their daughter finally arrived with the dawn, announcing her presence with a lusty cry that brought tears to Preston's eyes. "She has your determination," he told Greta as he placed the swaddled infant in her arms. "And your beautiful hair." Indeed, the baby had a dusting of auburn fuzz on her perfect head, and eyes that, while baby blue now, showed hints of the hazel they might become. They named her Elizabeth, after Greta's mother, with the middle name Marie for Preston's. As spring turned to summer, life at Keller Ranch adjusted to include its newest member. Elizabeth proved to be a good-natured baby, content to sleep in a basket near Greta as she worked in the garden or prepared meals. Preston became adept at holding his daughter while reviewing ranch accounts or planning breeding strategies, often talking to her about cattle lineages and grass conditions, as if she understood every word. "You will make her rancher before she can walk," Greta teased one evening, finding them thus engaged. "She'll be whatever she wants to be," Preston replied, looking down at Elizabeth's alert face. "But she should understand the family business, family business." The casual phrase encapsulated how completely their separate paths had merged into a shared future. Keller Ranch was no longer just Preston's dream but their joint legacy, something they were building together for Elizabeth and perhaps other children to come. When Elizabeth was 3 months old, Greta received a letter from Hungary, the first communication from her homeland since her departure. Her youngest brother, Mihaly, wrote that he was considering coming to America and wondered if Oklahoma might offer opportunities for a young man willing to work hard. "What do you think?" she asked Preston after translating the letter for him. "Mihaly is good worker, learns quickly." Preston considered only briefly before nodding. "We could use another hand, especially with the herd expanding. If he's anything like his sister, he'll be an asset to the ranch." The decision to invite Mihaly to join them represented more than just a practical business choice. It was an acknowledgement that Greta's past her heritage, her family connections had value to their shared future. By welcoming her brother, Preston was embracing not just the woman she had become in America, but all that had shaped her before their paths crossed. As autumn returned to the prairie and Elizabeth grew stronger daily, Greta found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place. She thought of that first day in Enid, the mockery of her accent, the alienation she had felt. And she remembered Preston's words in the wagon, "Your voice is home," a simple phrase that had offered acceptance when she needed it most. Now, as she moved confidently through her days speaking to Elizabeth in both Hungarian and English, directing ranch operations when Preston was away, conversing easily with neighbors and townspeople, despite her persistent accent, Greta understood what Preston had meant. Home wasn't about perfect English or American ways. It wasn't even about the ranch house they had expanded and improved together. Home was the space they had created between them, where differences were not just tolerated but valued. Where her Hungarian heritage and his American dreams wove together into something stronger than either could have built alone. One evening, as the first snow of winter dusted the prairie, Preston found Greta on the porch, Elizabeth bundled warmly against her chest. She was singing softly in Hungarian, an old lullaby from her childhood. Preston sat beside them, wrapping an arm around his wife and daughter. "What does it mean?" he asked when the song ended. "It is about little bird who flies far from nest but always remembers way home," Greta translated. My mother sang to me when I was small. Preston nodded, his eyes on Elizabeth's sleeping face. Will you teach it to me? I'd like to sing it to her too. The request, this desire to learn something of her language, to pass it on to their daughter, touched Greta deeply. Slowly, line by line, she taught Preston the Hungarian words, correcting his pronunciation with gentle humor until he could follow along with her. As their voices blended in the cold evening air, hers with its musical Hungarian inflections, his with the flat tones of the American Midwest, Greta felt a completeness she had never imagined possible when she first stepped off that stagecoach. Their differing accents created a harmony all their own, not perfect, perhaps, but genuine and beautiful in its uniqueness. This was the true meaning of Preston's words from that first day. This was home, not a place, but a belonging. Not the absence of differences, but their celebration. And as Elizabeth stirred against her chest, opening eyes that now clearly showed Greta's hazel flecked with Preston's blue, Greta knew with certainty that she had found where she was meant to be. This child, this man, this life they were building together, it was everything she had crossed an ocean hoping to find, and more than she had dared to dream. I love you, she said to Preston in English, then repeated it in Hungarian. Szeretlek. Szeretlek, he echoed, his American accent transforming the word but not its meaning. Always. The snow fell gently around the ranch house, blanketing the prairie in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light on the family gathered before it, a Hungarian immigrant who had found her voice in a new land, an American rancher who had found his heart in an unexpected place, and their daughter, who would grow up knowing that differences were not barriers but bridges. And in the quiet of that winter evening, as darkness settled over Keller Ranch, Greta said a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, accent, struggles, and all. For it was not despite these things but because of them that she had found her true home,